of these we've rated groups as severely impacted. So a little scant on the red box end, but you know, it's something. So when you see, here's our native species richness. What's going on with these two distributions? We get good separation, or is there overlap? There's overlap. There's some movement here though, so what it is kind of like a weak indicator, right? Native species richness. How about just the mean C? Are we getting some separation? We're starting to get some separation, so that means it's a better indicator, right? More powerful indicator. Well, FQI is just the product of mean C times the square root of native species richness. So what happens to this separation? Is it separated or is it overlapping? Overlapping. So the species richness component of FQI is actually making it weaker, making mean C weaker. But what happens if we do our weighted C? We get really good separation. This is exactly what you're trying to get when you're testing indicators. And so, yeah, what was I going to say? Why is a weighted C better? Well, it's because oftentimes when you have these severely impacted sites versus minimally impacted, the composition, just the species composition, is actually fairly similar, right? The species richness is fairly similar, but it's really a change in the abundance distribution of the plant community is what's going on. And you can only capture that in your metric if you incorporate the cover. So here's our data example again. This was before where we had our dominance for blue joint and Carex stricta. But now let's say Greek canary grass is the dominant at the expense of those other two. And so we have no change in the composition between those two hypothetical situations. So the native species richness is the same, the mean C is the same, the FQI is the same, but we got a big difference in our weighted C. That's where our power comes from. That kind of makes sense with folks? Resonate? Okay, that's how you calculate numbers. Well, now we need to put some meaning to these numbers. We do that with what's called this biological condition gradient. It's just, all that means is it's a general model of the response of the biological community in the face of human impacts or human type of stressors. It comes from the stream biological monitoring world. And in our case, we have these kind of 5 levels. We're only going to really be concerned with the top 4. So I have like a little graphical representation here. Again, let's go back to our fresh meadow type of situation. So let's say, you know, you have a fresh meadow, nothing's happened there, nothing's going on in the watershed, maybe you're in northern Minnesota. Typically what you would see is maybe a lot of Carex stricta, you know, some Calamagrostis canadensis, maybe some willow, a bunch of different forms, things of that nature. That's typically what you would see. We would say this is our exceptional condition. It has the composition and structure as it exists, the absence of measurable effects and stressors. Now let's say we've had an introduction of some Greek canary grass and some narrowleaf cattail. But really, they're just kind of hanging out. Nothing else is really going on there. And this is kind of our good condition. It's similar to our natural community. Some additional taxa may be present. There might be some minor changes in the abundance distribution. By and large, the composition is largely intact. Let's say now there's been some development in the watershed. Maybe the flooding regime has changed a little bit. Maybe we have some nutrient enrichment. And Greek canary grass starts taking off. So, you know, what we see is more Greek canary grass, less Carex stricta. We still have a bunch of stuff hanging on. We might lose 1 or 2 things, you know, lose some stuff. This is in line with the idea of fair. You know, we have moderate changes in structure and composition. Sensitive taxa are being replaced by more common taxa. Finally, let's say time has passed and Greek canary grass is completely taken over, which we've seen a lot of, and You know, we might still have the willow might still be hanging on in a couple of forms, but a lot of things have changed. And here's our Carrick stricta. It's just a couple of tussocks left there, and that's about it. So this is large to extreme changes in community structure and wholesale changes in composition. So now how can we put the meaning of those levels to the numbers? And this is where the data exercise comes in. So we're trying to define these 4 categories in weighted C, get some weighted C cutoffs. So we came up with this thing called the human disturbance assessment, which we can use to classify sites as a pre-settlement type of condition, we think, a minimally impacted type of condition, and a severely impacted type of condition. Moderate's in there too, but we're ignoring moderate because hey, we're really just kind of focusing on the ends, and that can get us to those cutoffs. And so what we did then is take a bunch of DNR relevant data, which mostly represented the good end, and went out and got data on our own as much as we could for the severely impacted end, for all these different community types, and just classified all those pieces of data, and then we just run the numbers, and we apply what's called the lowest scoring reference site concept to it. That's a pretty standard way in biological monitoring and assessment to come up with assessment criteria. To say, I'm going to really try to define what my good sites are, and then after that I'm going to let the data do the talking and just say what's the bottom end of that distribution. That's what we say is our change. And so with that we use the 10th percentile of these 2 distributions, and we added an additional criteria to get to exceptional. You have to have less than 1% total non-native taxa cover to get to exceptional. So it has to meet a certain high score and have less than that 1% to make exceptional. And we have good. And we just took that idea and flipped it on its head to make the line between fair and poor. We said, all right, what's the best scoring severely impacted site? And that will be our difference between poor and fair. Again, we did this for all the communities, and there was a lot of data involved. We used DNR relevant database and a bunch of our own data. We even had some core data in there as well. And so in the end, this is what we come up with for criteria. This is an example. Here's our hardwood swamp again. And so, you know, these are the distributions of those scores, and if we apply all those rules for cutoffs, that's what it would be. So let's say I went out and did a survey with a hardwood swamp and I got a 3.7. What would it be assessed as on this scale, according to that table? Fair, yes. How about if I had a 4.7 but I had 5% reed canary grass in it? Good, yes, awesome. So that's it. So we did all this exercise and tried to bring in all these ideas, and then we just ran the numbers, and now we're saying, okay, this has all this data behind it. You guys can go use it and hopefully make some, you know, scientifically defensible assessments with it. Okay, that was a lot of key components. Questions before we go into the example? No questions. You guys know everything. So let's say somebody wants some information on this wetland by this road crossing. Maybe there's going to be a big construction project. We want some beforehand information about it. And say, all right, we want this rapid FQA thing. So what would we do? Step by step. Our first step would be define our site boundaries, right? And we maybe take a swipe at, if you got the time and the GIS, swipe at mapping out the communities within the wetland site. So this is kind of the level of detail that we're talking about. It's fairly detailed work. So step 2, let's say you're on site now. You're coming on site. What do you do first? You take a little bit of time confirming and correcting your boundaries and your community types that are out there. So all this is from the bridge crossing. In the foreground, we see, yes, we do have fresh meadow, and yes, in the background we have a bunch of shrubs. That's our shrub car community. And then farther to the northwest there was some shallow marsh and it's full of cattails and looks like that. So now that we confirmed our different community types at our site, we can figure out what our base meander time is going to be. And the rule is 30 minutes for your first community, 20 additional minutes for each additional community. That's your base time. That's the time that you're going to be out there minimum. Now you can start your walk. And at this site, the walk looked like this. So I started here, did this windy path that tried to cover all the different community types. We're not saying like you have to divvy up a certain amount of time in each community. You kind of go with the flow a little bit. But make sure that you're kind of covering it pretty well. And so during your last 10 minutes of your base meander time, you start ticking off like how many additional species are we seeing. If you see less than 3 during that last 10 minutes, you're done. You can stop your meander and move on to covers. But if you see 3 or more, you keep going. You go another 10 minutes. So the reason why we threw that in there was to try to even out people's effort. People are going to work at different pace. You know, they're going to come at it at different levels. Make sense? If we had open water, you can, let's say this was like a depressional wetland with an open water in the middle. You'd get to your open water station, you got to do 3 of those. You just stop your time, do your station, and then hit your time, start going again. And then you make your cover estimations for each species within each community. All right, Rapid FQA calculator. So not only have we created a manual for this, we've also created an Excel spreadsheet that you can enter data in. It's on that website. I just downloaded a copy here, so let's do this copy real quick. So here's some instructions. It only carries up to 3 communities. But so, you know, in each community page, what you have to do is like define your community type. Let's say, stick with our fresh meadow. Oh, you have to know the area of your area, or at least have a rough percentage of area of each community within your site. You know, so if it was like 50%, you put that in there. So then you can just start entering data, like Calamagrostis. I thought this had autofill in it. But it does look up stuff, so it looks up all these things. So all you need to enter is a scientific name and a cover class. You know, so if you start entering data in, I'm not going to enter data. It'd be like watching curling, right? Curling is competitive cleaning. Yeah, okay, sorry. I had to throw that out. It's a tough crowd. If you entered your data in, then there's this metrics tab that has your weighted C, and it does your, it looks up against that table and makes the assessment for all of those things, as well as calculate a bunch of additional metrics that you might be interested in. And then if you had, once you entered all your data in, it would come up with an overall assessment. So that's out there, definitely for people to use. And people have been using it. I've been getting questions on it, so it's good. Let's see if I can get to it. There we go. So in the end, for that example, you know, we had 3 different communities: shrub car, fresh meadow, shallow marsh. These are the weighted C-scores for each of those. Condition categories for those. And so if you mapped it out, you'd come up with this proportion of the site that each community occupied. So like half of it was shrub car, 35% was fresh meadow, 50% was shallow marsh. We just put a numeral for these categories and then just do, again, a weighted average for the category and then back put it out. So this is your overall assessment for the site. And here's our table of assessment criteria for each community. Pretty cool, huh? So limitations, again, this is trying to focus on that moderate level of expertise. This probably is not for your beginner delineator. Hopefully they have some more experience in that. Maybe possible that your dominant, co-dominant species at a particular site is not on the rapid species list. Like, I don't think there's any juncus on there. Every once in a while, you might have a heavy juncus site. I would say in that situation, just still run it even if it doesn't have the dominant species on there, because there are a few occasions in the data set that we use to calibrate everything where that was actually the case, and we just filtered those species out and ran it anyway. Now, communities are covered, we don't have seasonally flooded basin. Community interpretation can be an issue for consistency, and that's always going to be an issue. I guess all I can say is, go look at a lot of wetlands. Do it often, and you'll come to some conclusions. Communities can be interpreted as former types under certain conditions and assessed as former types. The conditions are, do you have evidence of the former type? And is there evidence that it was a human cause that caused it to change? So my classic example is you go to something that's filled with cattails now, but there's a bunch of dead standing trees in it. It used to be a swamp, hardwood swamp, let's say. Now, is it that way because a beaver dam is there? Or is it that way because a highway was built and it backed up water because it was not culverted properly and changed the type? So if it was a man-made cause, I would say assess that thing as a hardwood swamp. It's really an impacted hardwood swamp. If it's a natural change, I would say the thing's now a marsh. Assess it as a marsh. Again, that's some interpretation there. And some of the assessment criteria don't have a lot of backing on the data. How about adapting alternative sampling approaches or applying existing data to assessment criteria? So you say, hey Mike, I got some other data, or we had to collect it this way, we were forced to collect it this certain way. We still do this Rapid FQA thing. I would say yes, as long as some certain conditions are met. Again, the sampling is done by community types. Intensity, the sampling is adequate to produce a quote-unquote representative sample. Now that's going to be in the eye of the beholder, obviously, but if you're defining your site and it looks like you're sampling this patch or that patch, you might say, well, it's not really full representation. And then finally, we got to have some cover estimates to work with. It doesn't have to be the same cover classes. It can be different types, but it should still work fine. And then finally, you got to have the taxonomic resolution at least to that rapid species list. It can be greater than that, but it can't be less than that. And you might say, hey Mike, I'm collecting this high quality all species data, or we have an older data set that has some really high quality data. My first question would be like, are you really sure? Just double checking. But if you're really sure, then, and as long as those first three conditions are met above, I'd say go ahead, and we have the all species criteria for the same communities. So and those are the criteria that we use when we do our surveys. And the numbers end up being a little bit different because there's different data involved. But when we were doing that whole data exercise to set those levels, we were doing it with all species data, and then we had one set of criteria for all species, and then we reduced that data down to that rapid species list, and then made that other set of criteria, so they're a little bit different. But you can find that on a different report, which we'll be getting to soon, but then you'll have to make the calculations on your own. But if you're getting all your all species data, you're a pretty smart person. Probably figured it out. You're not afraid of summation sign anymore? Yeah. An example of adapting data would be, say, what about the vegetative for your basic core determinations? I would say, it says in the supplements, you're supposed to be sampling by community type. If it's truly representatives by community type, and if you up your species species ID to that level of rapid species list for those plots, I don't see why you couldn't use that type of data to also do record. Yeah, go ahead.
Even though that doesn't require Meander?
Correct. So if you say if you feel good like you located your Army Corps plot and it's representing a broader area, it's truly, in the wetland, and you're IDing species to that, at least to that rapid species list, then I'd say you can go ahead and enter that data into the calculator, and that's a good representative number. There's guidance for this in the manual, Appendix 5, look at that. What about MinRam? You guys might have to do MinRams every once in a while. You guys all know it's qualitative, blah, 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 it has the 12 different functions. Well, these our 4 categories match up very well with the definition for the MinRam 4 categories. So, when we developed this, we developed it in a group setting. There was a technical committee, folks from Bowser and the Corps were there, all veterans, and said that, hey, you could just substitute Rapid FQA for the MinRam veg component. And then when you're entering those results into the MinRam database, you just translate them into that language. But when you're making your report, you can say, hey, I did Rapid FQA for the veg component. This is also an appendix in that manual. A little write-up on that. So all this stuff was on that web page I showed you. I'm so proud of this slide. All these things that come up. All these things are there. And we've done some trainings on this, like an all-day training. And I would say if you're interested in the all-day training, bug the certification program. We haven't done it in a couple of years, but it's been offered up as more of a, an advanced class for more advanced delineators that might be, looking for something else or, needing credit for something more advanced. So we got all this stuff out there. Before I move into the last phase of the talk, questions, comments?
Is there any efforts going on to either add in more sites to certain classification types, such as like the deep marsh, the ones that you showed that only have 2 classifications versus the complete 4? So in other words, it seems like the wetter it becomes, the less information there is.
There is no specific effort to do that, but I always have it kind of in my mind. We do a lot of this random monitoring now that I'll talk to in just a minute. So I kind of have it in my mind as we keep picking up sites for that, that'll kind of bolster our data, and then we can maybe take a second look at it sometime in the future, but that time is not now. But it is a good idea because some of those data sets are pretty scant. You could use some bolstering. There's a question in the back.
Yeah, are you aware of anyone who's used this method and basically had comparable levels compared to MinRam so that it could be used in a regulatory context? And the reason I ask is because the Corps of Engineers has had some preliminary guidance on that.
Yeah.
But I took just a hypothetical plat list and ran it through, and if you have a high site in MinRam, it could be like a medium-low site with FQA according to how the Corps of Engineers set it up.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure of specific people that have used it in that way, but I talked with Steve Eggers and how we put out the guidance and stuff, and and he was part of the technical committee. I think the same endpoints that they're trying to get at with MinRam are comparable to the endpoints of our categories. It's just that when they were doing it with MinRam, they were kind of, they were using their best professional judgment, whereas with the FQA now, we have, you know, the kind of the theoretical framework as well as a bunch of data to back it up. So it's definitely an advancement, and I would say, you know, obviously you have to communicate with whether it's Bowser or the Corps for using it in that purpose, but I would say that they're starting to see that, and it could be applied that way.
Well, I get what you're saying, it's an advancement, but it kind of, according to the way the Corps outlined it, it slides the scale for a high-quality site way up. So that a high-quality site in Minram doesn't even score very high with FQA.
Oh,
They're
right.
different,
For different
they're made of
scales.
different things.
Yeah, they might be a little bit. Might be worthwhile taking a look at it again, but I think when we talked it over before, that they were fairly comparable theoretically anyway. And maybe in practice, not as much.
So with the advancement to the Rapid FQA and all the numbers you have to back it up, excuse me, can you tell me why we would want to go to the FQA and full assessment? And is there any regulatory reason to do that?
Like a regulatory reason to use full FQA versus rapid?
Right.
All right, yeah. What's the difference between the rapid and the full? So they have the same outcomes, the same endpoints is what we're measuring. It's just a coarser level of information. So when I ran the numbers, I think at one point I did like, all right, we have like the all species data, and it comes out with these endpoints, and then if we simplified that data and reran it against the simplified criteria, are the endpoints the same as the full? And it was something like 80, 85%. So let's say 80% of the time, the rapid will return the same answer that detailed data would give you. So that's about the best answer we have. So you're sacrificing a little bit of accuracy for, you know, either the ability to be able to do it period or the ability to do it faster. Does that make sense?
I hesitate to say anything, but I feel obligated. Because I'm afraid that if I start talking, I won't stop. But to answer his question, we use the full FQA, FQI for monitoring of mitigation banking sites at a really high level, monitoring them every year, sometimes 19, 20 plots per 100-acre site, and describing every species present in a 10 by 10 meter plot, and cover classes, etc., over and over and over again. And the core, and we talk about regulation, I mean, there's almost zero guidance, but we have to basically come up with guidance and then have it approved by the agencies about how to crosswalk, whether it's MinRam or DNR, ecological ranking guidelines, or whatever, to the FQA score, or scores. And the thing that you really haven't talked about today is the middle range. And we talk about degraded, and then you talk about highest quality, exceptional quality. But when you're taking a site from degraded all the way up to hopefully higher exceptional quality, there's several different gradients over time. And then things like when are credits released, and what's a preliminary vegetation performance standard, what's a second tier performance standard, when have you met those? And if you're basing it on a weighted C value, you're talking a scale from 0 theoretically to 10, but you're never going to get to 10. So you're talking about increments of 1 or tenths to justify what they call functional lift of vegetation. So whereas when you go from a 4.1 weighted mean C to a a 5.1, how do you achieve some sort of what they call functional lift, and then try to justify that. It's a lot, I don't know if it's easier, but it's maybe a little bit more doable to talk about an FQI starting out at 0 or 1 or 2 or 5 and bringing it up to an 18 and bringing it up to a 25 and being able to predict the maximum value that that community will achieve based on DNR plots into the 36. So you're never going to reach that, but be able to kind of crosswalk these things with a full-blown FQI rather than just going off of the one metric that you're talking about, which your diagram shows is very powerful. But Swink and Wellham, when they wrote the original FQA, they have species diversity in there for a reason. Square root of S is important because it's not just, if it was just weighted C, they would have said, well, let's just calculate weighted C and call it good. But, so there's things that you can get at with a full-blown FQI over time that you just can't get at with just the weighted C. But if you were to try to apply a full FQI over a landscape every year, I mean, it would be a budget. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, the thing that keeps kind of coming up with the folks that test these metrics is that species richness happens to be a weak metric or a non-indicator sometimes, period. And so, I mean, that's when we're kind of doing these tests on this kind of natural wetland, you know, maybe it's a different case when you're talking restoration and you're talking this narrow time frame of those 5-year releasing the credit. I mean, maybe that's a different thing, but at least in this kind of framework, species richness ends up not being all that great.
You could have a weighted C of a wet meadow in the metro that's 0 with its reed canary grass dominant, 100% reed canary grass, and you could have a weighted C that's a 5 if it's 100% Carex lacustris with no other species in it. And I know that's an extreme example, but if you say that Carex lacustris dominated system or Calamagrostis canadensis is high quality because it's at a weighted mean C of 5, you're missing the entire species diversity.
Right. Well, one of the things that went into that I didn't really touch on is that at that highest level we used the DNR condition rankings to define that highest level. So you could get a fresh meadow that was all Calamagrostis and only 6 other species, and it's coming up as minimally impacted by our scale, and the DNR ecologists call that an A. So by those 2 tokens, we'd say, well, we got to put it in that upper level.
And what I'm saying, his question was regulatory based, and Antonio, the regulator, was saying,
I know.
From a 0 to a 6 is not going to get you credits, but raising it from an FQI of 0 to a 25 FQI is